It's my pleasure to introduce Katie today. Katie is an ELT teacher based in Milan. In 2013, she was nominated for an Elton Award, the Education Award for Innovative Writing. As you can tell from the title of her talk, she speaks 5 languages, and she is the founder of the blog Joy of Languages, and she regularly speaks at conferences, especially polyglot conferences, and she is here to tell us what learning 5 languages has taught her about English language teaching. And she teased me there by disappearing. Katie, are you still with us?
I'm still with you, yes.
Okay. All right, so over to you, Katie, and I will now switch my microphone off. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I'm Katie Harris, and I'm an English teacher in Milan. But as well as being an English teacher, I'm also a huge language learning fan, and I speak a few. So in today's session, we're going to talk about how polyglots learn languages and what we as teachers can learn from them to help our own teachers learn languages more to help our own students learn languages more effectively. So before we get into that, I'd like to ask you a quick question. What do you think? Why are some people better at learning languages than others? Is it A, that they have special brains? B, they have more willpower? C, they do things differently? Or D, they live in the country? Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I'm just interested in getting your opinions. Some might be a combination, and great, I can see people are already typing some combinations, great, very quickly. So you've got Daria, B and C, more willpower and they do things differently. So I'm going to give you my opinion on this question shortly. But first, I'd like to introduce you to 22-year-old me. So this is me 10 years ago. I was completely monolingual. The only language I spoke was English. I'd done 5 years of German at school, and all I could remember was a selection of random words like Taschenrechner, which is calculator, and Meerschweinchen, which I believe is guinea pigs. And at the time that this photo was taken, I was really struggling with Italian. So here is me in Italy, but not being able to speak Italian. I was taking an Italian elective at university, and I was really struggling both in terms of performance, but also in terms of motivation. So I often skipped classes, and I didn't do my homework very much either. In fact, I was struggling so much that the course director actually sent home a naughty letter threatening to throw me off the course if I didn't change my ways. Skip ahead to now, and language learning is probably my biggest passion in life. I speak Italian at C2 levels. I've done the C2 exam, and I've passed the French C1 exam. I speak Spanish at around a B2 level, and then I speak German and Mandarin Chinese at somewhere between A2 and B1 level. And if we go back to our question here, what changed for me? How did this happen? I certainly didn't develop a special brain, and I wasn't born with one. If I had a special brain for languages, I wouldn't have had so many problems at school with German and at university with Italian. I didn't suddenly develop more willpower. I've never been able to force myself to sit down and memorize verb tables, and unfortunately, I don't think I ever will be able to. And it wasn't because I lived in the country, because aside from Italian, I've never lived in the country of the place of the languages I speak. The only thing that changed for me was the way that I learnt these languages. And through my blog, I've been very fortunate to be able to hang out with some extremely prolific language learners. So you can see on the right there is Alex Rawlings, who won the title of Britain's most multilingual student. At the time, he spoke 11 languages. Now I believe it's 15. Then in the middle is Olly Richards, and he speaks 8 languages. Next to him, there is Richard Simcott, who speaks 16 languages fluently and has studied over 40. And then we have Lindsay with the yellow skirt. So she's a big believer in making the polyglot community more inclusive and more accessible to language learners and people who love languages in general. So she doesn't call herself a polyglot, and she doesn't give a specific number of languages that she speaks, but she studied over 11 and she speaks a few of those fluently. So how do these people learn languages? Here are some examples of how Richard Simcott, the guy who speaks 16 languages, here are some examples of what he does to study languages. And a couple of points that are particularly interesting here is that he tries to speak quite early on, and he's happy to make mistakes because he uses them as opportunities to learn more, which we'll look at a little bit later. And he also uses a system called mnemonics to remember challenging words. So those words that just won't stick. And what is mnemonics? Mnemonics is when you make a word in your target language easier to remember by linking it to something that sounds similar in your native language. So for example, here we've got the word for book in Chinese is shu. So can you think of a word in English that sounds similar to that? Great, yes, very quick off the mark there, answering, so perfect, yeah, shoe. Many people writing shoe. So how could you use this to help you remember the word book in Chinese? You can link the two together in an image. For example, you could imagine a shoe, a big shoe with a little book inside, or a book with a shoe on top. Then we've got Olly Richards, who likes to get up early. You'll see this is a bit of a common theme, not for everybody, but for lots of people. And his the main methodology that he uses to study languages is through simple stories. He likes to learn grammar from within the context of a story. And a technique that he uses to remember vocabulary is called spaced repetition. And it's used in combination with digital flashcards. So I'll start by explaining first what digital flashcards are. Digital flashcards are it's an electronic way, so you can get apps. There are many different apps that are available for digital flashcards. That is an electronic way to quiz yourself on information that you want to remember. So for example, you can put questions into these apps, questions for yourself, to quiz yourself on the words that you want to remember. For example, I could write a prompt in Chinese, like 我看一本, which is I read a. How could you finish this sentence in Chinese? So we've got I read a book. So how would you say this in Chinese? Can you remember? Great, yeah, shu, perfect, yeah. Very fast with the answers today. So, and with this digital flashcard app, you'd get the question, think of the answer, push a button, and then it will give you the answer so you can test yourself. And many language learners use this in combination with spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is based on studies by the German psychologist Ebbinghaus, who found that humans can remember information much more easily when it's little and often. So we're much more likely to remember something if we review it between 5 and 10 minutes a day for a week compared to just a whole hour one day a week. And these digital flashcard apps do this automatically, so they space out the reviews of the words for you. Then we've got Lindsay Williams. So Lindsay Williams also gets up very early. She gets up at 5, although she wanted me to specify that she doesn't start learning a language at 5 a.m. So she takes her time and make sure that she's feeling nice and awake and start studying languages at 7 o'clock. She, like Richard, likes to make mistakes and learn from her mistakes. And she uses social media to connect with other language learners and hold herself accountable. So at the beginning of each month, she talks about her language learning goals, and she sets herself a series of goals for the end of the month. Then at the end of the month, she makes a video or makes a blog post and talks about whether she managed to achieve them or not. So that puts a nice little bit of social pressure and pushes her towards reaching her goals. Then we've got Alex Rawlings, and his technique is very much based around learning by doing as well. So he likes lots of speaking, reading, listening, and writing. And he has a few different techniques that he talks about for learning vocabulary. One that I think is particularly interesting is that he likes to learn vocabulary during conversations. So asking native speakers about words that he doesn't know yet in the conversation, and then trying to reuse them again in the conversation because that makes them more memorable. Then we've got a couple more. So we've got Benny Lewis, who has a technique that's very much based around speaking. He starts trying to make himself speak as early as possible, even from the first day. And he sets himself these crazy goals, like reaching C2 in 3 months, which he's managed to achieve in a few different languages. Then we've got Lydia Machova, who studies languages very consistently. She studies a new language every 2 years. She studies for at least an hour a day, and she uses, amongst other methods, she uses the bilingual translation method, which involves reading a text in the target language or getting a transcript in the target language, translating it into your native language, and then the next day translating it back into the target language. So that way she can compare what she wrote with the original and learn from her mistakes. She also uses the gold list method for learning vocabulary. Now, I haven't used this method myself, so I can't give you very specific details, but it consists of, in a textbook or in your notebook, writing on one side, writing around 25 words in the language that you want to remember, so either words or phrases, and then on the other side, writing the translation in your native language and reading them aloud. Then after 2 weeks, you come back to it and you see what you can still remember and take the words that you can't remember and then repeat the process. So what have I learned from all of these polyglots? I've learned that there is certainly no magic bullet for language learning. There's no one magic technique that everybody uses. In fact, there are as many different ways to learn a language as there are polyglots. But I've also noticed that they seem to have one big thing in common. Can you guess what it is? Great, so we're getting some great ideas here. Consistency, motivation, practice. Great, hardworking, effort. Yeah, all certainly things that they have in common. But there's something bigger that I think encompasses all of these ideas. And to find out what it is, we have to go back to 22-year-old me. Now, when I was 22, I had 2 problems. The first problem was that I couldn't learn a language. I was really struggling in my Italian course, which was putting me at risk for not getting a very good mark overall for my degree. So this was very important at the time. And I also couldn't maintain a healthy weight. So I was constantly yo-yo dieting. Mondays, every Monday would start with a green tea and a salad, and every Sunday would finish with pizza and ice cream. And interestingly, when I moved to Italy, I found something that helped me to solve these 2 problems. And surprisingly, it was a kind of similar technique. So Italians don't diet. How do they stay so slim? You know, they eat pasta, pizza, tiramisu. Italians don't diet and they stay so slim because they have healthy lifestyles. They cook, they rarely eat processed foods, and they eat lots of fruits and vegetables. So it's not about dieting. For Italians, staying healthy is all about lifestyle. And for polyglots, this is very similar. The polyglots don't see language learning as a school subject with an exam at the end. They integrate learning these languages into their lives. And this was what I did with Italian, and this was what allowed me to go from being a monolingual who was really struggling with languages at school to learning several and falling in love with the process of learning languages. So I stopped seeing Italian as an academic subject with an exam at the end, and I started trying to live the language instead. And I started doing things that I enjoyed, like speaking to native speakers, or reading and watching TV series, which was very tricky at first, but I was motivated to do it because I found it very, very interesting. Now, what does this mean for our students? So our students are never going to be, or the majority of our students are never going to be crazy polyglots. It's not reasonable of us to expect our students to study English for 3 hours a day. But the interesting thing about adopting learning a language as a lifestyle is that it's not an all or nothing thing. The language learning lifestyles of many of the polyglots are based on a few basic principles that anybody can apply, even if it's just a little bit, to become better at learning languages and to find language learning easier. So the real question is, how can we help our students do these things? Number one, how can we help students learn by doing? So often when I'm speaking to successful language learners, a topic that comes up every now and then is, why do so many people really struggle to learn languages? And a general consensus, one thing that comes up very often, is the idea that many people spend too much time learning things in an abstract way, rather than putting it into practice. Aha, and I can see we've got Aref has written task-based learning there, so yes, you're certainly, we're getting onto that. And so the way that polyglots learn by doing, that many polyglots learn by doing, interestingly, is linked to some of the methodology that we use in ELT, even though they may not realize it, they've kind of arrived at it from a different angle, but they've arrived at many of the same conclusions. For example, task-based learning. So while John Lennon said life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, the polyglot motto could be, language learning is what happens when you're busy doing other things. So we can use task-based learning to help our students learn by doing and learn by practicing. So let's give it a go. Let's go on a road trip. So we're going on a road trip to the UK for 1 week. Let's organize it. What do we need for our road trip? Yep, we need a map, absolutely. We definitely need a map. Tickets, absolutely. A car, yeah, we're definitely going to need a car if we're going on a road trip. So you can do this with your students and brainstorm what will they need for the road trip. And then set them a task to do in groups. You can set them the task of organizing their road trip. They can decide things like which cities to visit, where to stay, which car to hire, and what activities they'd like to do. And you can even give them a budget per group. And if you let your students use their smartphones in class, they can actually use real materials to find these things. So they could use booking websites and car hire websites and blogs or other websites to find activities, for example, in English, of course. And then at the end, once students have done this task, you could also get them to present their ideas and take a class vote about which trip they would prefer to go on. So task-based learning usually follows a 3-step structure. There's the pre-task, where you give students a clear task and examples. So for the road trip one, you could plan your own road trip first. You could tell students what car you'd like and what accommodation you'd like, and then ask students to do the same. Then as students are doing the task, you can walk around and help them. And then at the end, there is a feedback stage where you can give students suggestions on how to improve. And importantly, help them learn from their mistakes. And while we're on the topic of mistakes, another big difference between people who see language learning as a school subject and people who integrate language learning into their lives is their attitude towards mistakes. So people who live a language, like the polyglots, are often much happier to make mistakes because they see them as learning opportunities. And here we can see what Richard Simcott has to say about it. So he says that he says that finding out what he's doing wrong actually reinforces the patterns of a language. So making mistakes and getting feedback helps him learn grammar. And it's important as teachers to realize that when students come to us, most of the time they're coming from a school system which really highlights the ideas to them that making mistakes is bad. You know, if they make lots of mistakes, they get a low grade, and then maybe their parents are annoyed at them or they're annoyed at themselves. And if they don't make any mistakes, then they get a high grade and they feel really proud. So often when students come to us, they are afraid of making mistakes, which means that they're afraid to try and they don't have as many learning opportunities. So what can we do to make our classrooms a place where students feel comfortable making mistakes and they see them as a learning opportunity? One thing you can do is ask students at the end of class, what mistakes did you make today? And what did you learn from them? So this way it changes the focus from the red pen, these are all the things you did wrong, to looking at how they can learn from mistakes. Another option is that when you correct written work, instead of just giving them the answer immediately, you could highlight the areas where the students could improve and give the text back to the students and ask them to work in groups together to see if they can find the answers for everybody's texts. And this makes making mistakes a normal thing, and it changes the focus from, oh, look at all these things you did wrong, to let's work together to find the answers. And another ELT methodology that is very popular amongst successful language learners and polyglots is comprehensible input, which is a theory developed by Krashen in the 70s and the 80s. And it states that people learn languages better when they're using the language to understand the message. So for example, via reading and listening, rather than memorizing grammar and vocabulary or memorizing rules consciously. And there are two of his ideas that we're going to talk about today. The first is comprehensible input, which the input part is getting lots of reading and lots of listening. And the comprehensible part is that it should be slightly more difficult than your current level, but not so difficult that you don't understand anything. So you're learning new words and you're seeing new structures, but you can still follow the gist of what's going on. And from what I've seen, successful language learners do lots of this. Most people that can speak a language well do lots and lots of reading and listening. And they tend to choose a level that is a comfortable level. So most don't go for things where they have to stop every five seconds and check new words in the dictionary. They tend to choose materials where they can get into a good flow, but there are still some new things to learn. So the question is, how can we help our students do more reading and listening like this? and we'll look at this later in the later on during the presentation. The second idea that we're going to talk about today is that studying grammar isn't helpful. And this doesn't seem to fit in, this part of Krashen's ideas doesn't seem to fit in so well with what I've seen polyglots doing. So polyglots all have different opinions about grammar, and some study loads, some don't study so much, but even the ones who are not really into grammar and they don't have techniques that are based around studying grammar, they're still looking at it and thinking about it in some way. So for example, via bilingual translations, where they're comparing the structures in the first language and the structures in the target language, or via corrections. If you make a grammatical mistake and then somebody corrects you and tells you the right way, then you're still thinking about the grammar. And another popular method is also input first. So some people spend lots and lots of time at the beginning doing lots of reading and doing lots of listening, and only once they feel comfortable and familiar with the language, then do they start studying the rules. So there's lots of different methods, and polyglots differ in how much they like to think about grammar, but they all do seem to think about it in some way. So what does this mean for us as teachers? Continue teaching grammar by all means, but don't teach it so much that it compromises the opportunity to give students lots and lots of time to practice as well. So it's all about balance. Now let's talk a little bit about time. And I'd like to ask you a question. Are we responsible for what students learn outside of the classroom? Some people saying yeah. I think so. No, we're getting a real mix of answers here, which is great. So I recently changed my opinion on this. So for several years when I was teaching, my opinion was no. As a teacher, it was my job to deliver the best possible lesson that I could, but then I couldn't really control what students did outside of the class. There were students who did loads of things, the really motivated ones, and there were less motivated students who did next to nothing. I didn't think it was my job to try and change those students, and even if I wanted to, I wasn't really sure if I could. But at the same time, more recently, I started thinking, and I know as an enthusiastic language learner, I know that to learn a language well, you need to put in the time. An hour a week is not enough to see tangible progress. And I also started asking my high level students, so the C1s, how did you get to your level? And here's an example of some of the answers that they gave me. So looking at these answers, we've got some real answers and some fake ones. So what do you think, which do you think are the real answers and which do you think are the fake ones? Great. We've got Mark saying Depeche Mode, his wife says the same. Holiday. So which ones do you think are real and which do you think are fake? Great. So we're getting a good mix of answers here again. So all real. All right, so there is a fake one, and I will show you now. The fake one was 6 years of classes. So whenever I ask my advanced students, oh, how did you get to that level? Almost nobody replies, well, I started at A1 and I worked my way up to the system. So I worked my way through the system up to C1. And occasionally the students that do answer like this, sometimes it's a problem because their level is actually lower than the other students in the class. because they haven't been doing as much outside of the lessons. So, of course, our students, the students who gave all of these answers like Depeche Mode and Netflix, I'm sure they were doing other things as well. But these answers show that to reach a high level, students are usually doing a lot of work independently on their own, outside of class. So the question is, how can we help students who don't take the initiative to do this on their own? Telling them is not enough. I've tried this, and the answer that I get all the time is, I'm busy. Which is true. Our students are busy. They have jobs, they have families, and it's important to respect that. But at the same time, in busyness, there is always an element of choice. I'm sure if we offered our students £1,000 for every hour of English they studied, they would find more time to study English, even the really busy ones. So the question is, how can we help our students choose to spend more time studying English? And it doesn't have to be an hour a day. Even just 5 minutes a day is enough to get the ball rolling. If we look at our students' answers again, these are all the real ones, they have something in common. These look like things the students probably enjoyed doing. So that leads me to the next part, which is, how can we help our students do things they enjoy in class, or outside of class, rather? When I moved to Italy, one of the things that I was really surprised about was how Italians ate vegetables. It was totally different to how I ate vegetables in England when I was on my yo-yo dieting, so steamed and boiled. When Italians eat vegetables, they cover them in oil and salt, so they're suddenly really, really tasty. And that makes it much easier to eat vegetables and to have a balanced diet. And the same happened for me with languages. The way that I fell in love with learning Italian was that I had this great Italian teacher who essentially covered Italian in oil and salt for me. So she did things like she got us to speak about topics that we found really interesting, or at least tried to speak. She used really interesting materials in the lessons as well, like videos where we were really curious to see what happened next. And I'm not going to go into lots of detail here about how to do this in class, because in the schools that I've worked in before, I've seen that most teachers are thinking about how to engage students in class, and most are doing a really, really good job. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can help students find activities to do that they enjoy outside of class. And we can take some inspiration from Google. So have you ever heard of Google's 20%? So this is a letter from the founders of Google to their shareholders, where they talked about how they give their workers 20% of the time to spend on projects that they choose and projects that they are passionate about. And they believe that this would make them more creative and innovative. And I believe if we can give students some time to spend finding things that they enjoy, then this will make them more enthusiastic language learners and essentially better at learning English. So one thing I like to do with my students is to give them passion projects. And I dedicate some time in class to helping students find resources that they will enjoy using outside of class. At the beginning, this is very structured. So we'll look at things together. Maybe I'll show them a YouTube video that I think they'll like, and then we'll do some activities with it. Or we'll listen to a podcast that I think they'd enjoy, and we'll do some activities with it. Or possibly a book or some blogs. And this stage is really important because I've tried in the past to tell students, you need to find things you enjoy, but that turns out to be quite difficult because often they don't really know where to start. So it's really important to give them concrete examples of things that they can do. and do it together in class first. But once you've done this and students have started to think about and to find resources that they enjoy, you could also dedicate some freer class time to the students' passion projects, where you help them, or you just let them choose and work on their own things for a little bit of time in class. And then, importantly, for homework, you can ask them to pursue their passion projects. So I have, now I give my students 2 pieces of homework. The first piece of homework helps them to review what we did in class, and the second is to pursue their passion projects. And for me, it's actually more important that they do the second one. So we've got students who hopefully now have chosen something that they enjoy to do in English. How can we help them to do it consistently? So we know that successful language learners learn consistently. We saw the examples from all of the polyglots at the beginning there. They're extremely consistent, and many of them learn a little bit every day, or, well, in their case, a lot every day, but they're learning every day. And I've experimented with lots of different ways to try and help my students do this, and I found 2 that work really well. The first is to start tiny. And I developed this after I realized the inverse homework rule, which was that when I give my students a lot of things to do for homework, they get confused and overwhelmed, and the number of students that do it drop a lot. So I tend to get a lot of students coming to class who haven't done anything at all because it just feels too confusing and overwhelming. And on the other hand, if I give them something very small and very clear to do, they seem to actually do more than I set. And I think the reason is that once it's easy to start, it's easy to continue. The key, our job is just to get students to start. Then once they've started, they'll continue themselves. So I like to set them a very, very tiny piece of homework, 5 minutes a day, to do their passion projects. So that's all I'm asking of my students, is to do something they enjoy in English for 5 minutes a day. Not so difficult, right? But then what happens is that once they start doing these things for 5 minutes, once they're sitting down, they're probably not going to like close the book and then go off and do something else after 5 minutes. Once they've actually started, they'll probably do 10 or 15 or maybe even half an hour. So now we've got our students who are doing something that is enjoyable and easy. What happens? Suddenly, it becomes easy for them to study English. And this can lead to a really powerful shift in their identity. So once they find English easy to study and they're doing it for 5 minutes a day or more, they suddenly become the kind of person who enjoys studying English and who does it regularly. And once they start to see themselves in this way, it's much easier for them to start studying English again. So this leads to a really nice virtuous cycle where hopefully the students are becoming more and more engaged in the things that they're doing in English and seeing themselves more and more as the type of person who likes English. So 5 minutes is a very small shift, but it can lead to very big changes within our students. Another technique that I found works really well is peer power. So how many of you know what Weight Watchers is? Have you heard of Weight Watchers before? We're getting some yeses and some no's. So if you've heard of Weight Watchers, what is it? So Weight Watchers is it's a system where people meet once a week in a group. They weigh themselves and they give each other support and advice. And there's a lot of research that indicates that when we try to reach a goal as part of a group, we're much more successful in reaching that goal. So I have created in my class Weight Watchers for language learners. Just 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of every class where students get together and they talk about the passion projects that they did at home. And we get a real mix here. So we might get some students, the really, really motivated ones who've read a whole book or watched a whole TV series. And then we might get the very busy students who've just desperately listened to a podcast on the way to class. But either way, almost everybody is doing more than they would have done otherwise. And there are two reasons that this works really well. The first is because it puts a little bit of pressure on the students. So I like to call it peer power rather than peer pressure, because they're helping each other to improve. But students know that they're expected every week to have done their passion projects at home. And if they come every week and they say, no, I didn't do anything, no, I didn't do anything, after a while it starts to get a little bit embarrassing. So it pushes them a little bit to do more. And the second reason is that students can share resources in this way. So maybe one of the students in the group will say, this week I found something I really enjoyed. I read this really interesting graded reader, maybe you'd like it, or I found this really cool podcast. And so students can find resources from each other. And having that kind of recommendation from a peer is so much more powerful compared to the boring old teacher telling them what to do. So let's move on to the last point. How can we help students be more independent? So again, we saw at the beginning that successful language learners really take responsibility for their own learning. And as teachers, we can organize information to make it easier to understand and easier to remember. We can try to motivate students by making lessons engaging, but we cannot do the learning for the students. So there are a couple of ways that we can encourage students to become more independent, and 2 steps that will help them start to do things on their own. So the first is noticing. Students, to make progress, students have to notice where their weaknesses are. They have to be able to notice the things that they don't know yet and that are worth learning. And secondly, they have to be able to find the answers to these independently. So how can we do this with our students? Well, most of us are probably already doing it to a certain point, because we have discovery learning, which is very popular at the moment in textbooks and extremely useful for helping students to become more independent. For example, this is a typical discovery learning activity where, let's imagine we've read a text, and then we pick 2 sentences out from the text, past simple, present perfect, and we ask students to compare the 2 and give them questions that will guide them to finding the difference between the 2. And so here we also have, this is a great example of a textbook with this type of activity. So you get the grammar book, the grammar box in textbooks that gives you these examples and asks students questions that will lead them to find the rules on their own. Although I'm not always sure how easily students can transfer this into their real lives. So it's really useful within the textbook. What we want to do as teachers is make sure that students are doing this with everything they come across. So all of the English they read and listen to, they're trying to discover the rules and the answers on their own. And one way that we can do this is to encourage them to do discovery learning on things that are outside of the textbook. So any text they read, you can do an activity with them to help them to start to notice new and important things. So for example, and this could be with one of their passion projects, for example. So you can divide a piece of paper down the middle and ask students to think about things that are interesting. So this means things that maybe students understand, so they don't have questions about them, but they realize that they are important and they want to learn them. For example, like collocations. Okay, a major problem, I understand what that means, but this could be interesting. Maybe I want to use this and remember this in future. Or a frightening number. I can kind of figure out what that means, but look, okay, so the adjective of frighten is frightening. And then on the other side, we have the questions. So this is for the part where students really don't know what's happening. You know, maybe there's a word that they don't understand, or grammatical point that's stopping them from understanding. So now we have our students who have these questions. What can we do with these questions? Let's imagine a student asks us, oh, how do you say keep up? Or what does keep up mean? Of course, you could just answer and say, oh, it's like a synonym of continue. But this is an opportunity to train the students and to help them to become more independent learners and train their independent research skills. So we have these questions. What activities could you do in class to help students find the answers on their own? Feel free to write your ideas in the chat box. Great, so we've got Google, yeah, a great one. They can do some research on Google, certainly. And dictionary, yeah, great. Perfect, and then so we've got, great, put them into small groups and promote discussion, certainly. Good, I think you've said pretty much all of the ones that I was thinking about actually, which is, yeah, asking other students, so put them into small groups, using dictionaries, grammar books, or websites. And it's really important that we dedicate some time in class to helping students develop these skills. I think as teachers, these skills come very naturally to us, and it's really easy to forget that not everybody is used to using dictionaries all the time, or not everybody knows how to find the answer to a grammar question. So it's important to dedicate some time to this in class so that students can start to do this on their own. All right, so today we talked about how polyglots learn languages and they integrate language learning into their lives. We talked a little bit about how we can help our students do the same. We talked about helping them use the language in class via task-based learning and helping them get more input, reading and listening. We talked about how to help students put in more time, and it certainly helps if they enjoy it. We then talked about how to help our students find these resources that they enjoy via passion projects. How to help students become more consistent learners by starting with just 5 minutes, keeping it very tiny, making it easy to start, and peer power, so working together in groups and talking about what they did for homework. And then finally, helping students become independent learners. So noticing what they don't know yet and finding the answers on their own. So I'd like to end on the idea that they say, if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a meal. But if you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And I think the same is true of our students. If we prepare a fantastic, engaging lesson, students will learn English for an hour. But if we give them the tools to find ways to learn English that they enjoy and develop their own learning, then our students will learn English for a lifetime. All right, so that was it for my presentation, and I think Mike is going to come back in now.
Yeah, Katie, thank you very much. I think you'll all agree that was a fantastic session, a really interesting look at how polyglots learn languages and how we English language teachers can learn from that. So it was great of you to share all of your insight with us. So thank you so much, Katie. Yes, and we still have a few minutes of Katie's time, so you've got a chance to ask us some questions. I want to thank as well the Macmillan team behind this webinar, so Piotr, Kasia and Sonali for all their work. And don't worry, you will get a certificate for attending to this webinar. In the next 2 or 3 days, we'll send you your certificate by email, so you don't have to download it, you don't have to do anything else. So that's coming your way. And the next webinar in our series will be on the 12th of December, and a special treat before Christmas. Sarah Mercer is going to tell us all how to manage the madness. So that's a talk on teacher well-being which will give you food for thought over the Christmas holidays. So a big thank you to everyone who's attended from Macmillan Education. And now we have a few more minutes left. So if you have any questions for Katie, please put them in the chat box. And I can see there are lots of comments, so we'll have to be quick, Katie, to catch what the questions are.
Oh, great. So the first question we had from Devi, which is, how do you manage the time to study many languages? Which I think is an excellent question. I'm part of the get up early crew. I try and get up early and do an hour before I start my day. But of course, that doesn't have to be an hour. You know, that could be half an hour or even 15 minutes. It depends on how much time you have. But I find that I have to make the time in my day to make it happen. Otherwise, it just gets pushed to later and later and later, and then tomorrow, and then it never happens.
Okay. Thanks. And I noticed a couple of questions. Yes, we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available on our YouTube channel next week. So we will post that for you next week. So keep your eyes open for that, because I noticed a few people were asking if they can watch the recording. So that will be there. What about motivating students?
Yeah, I just spotted another question. Yeah, which is, what can I do when a student is not motivated in learning languages? Which I think is an excellent question, and it's one that I still ask myself almost every day, especially now that I've started my mission to try and motivate the demotivated ones as well. And I think it depends on the students. You know, my method is not foolproof, unfortunately. I've had a couple of students. Last year, one student who I didn't manage to motivate. This year things have been going a little bit better, but every now and then as well, I have those students that unfortunately, no matter how hard I try, nothing seems to work. But so sadly, I don't really have the answer for that. And I think that as much as we can help students and we can try our best to motivate them, there may still be students who, no matter what we do, just aren't motivated, and we shouldn't feel bad about the fact that we can't change them. But I do think that this method of trying to help students find things that they enjoy can still work for the majority of students, and even ones who come to class and seem very demotivated at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think most of the tips that you've shared, Katie, if applied correctly, will help motivate all your students. So I think that's a big part of your talk today. Just a reminder, I've seen a few comments. Yeah, you'll get a certificate. We will be emailing the certificate directly to you. So I've seen a question there, Katie. What about dealing with large classes? Have you got any advice there?
So this was actually speaking about the passion project. So this was something that I developed for large group classes, because I noticed it was something that I was already doing naturally with my private students, with my individual students, because that's much easier to talk to them one-to-one and help them to find things. But I think a lot of the techniques that we've looked at today can work for large groups as well. And so just putting students, the large group, putting them into much smaller groups and having them speak together about what they've done during the last week in English. It's something that can be done with a small group of 4 students or a large group of 30 students.
And what about students who also have to pass an exam? Any particular tips there? Yeah,
I think so. With exams, obviously it is trickier. You know, you can't a student can't pass an exam from watching Netflix. So it does require a different set of skills and a different teaching approach. But even within that, I think it is still possible to help students find things that they enjoy alongside doing practice exams, for example, and preparing the exam technique. So, for example, something like preparing for the IELTS, alongside having the textbook and working on the IELTS skills, could you find something that the students enjoy that has vocabulary and grammar and it will be useful for them for the IELTS exam? So, for example, do they like reading things like The Economist? Could they start doing that in English? Or BBC, certain BBC documentaries, things that might have similar language, particularly when it comes to reading, that they might come across in the exam.
So a question, and I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. But the comments are going too quickly for me.
Yeah. So I had, let's see. Oh, yes, they're going a bit quickly for me as well. So we had a question about should there be a balance between input and output, which I think is an excellent question. So, for example, we talked about how polyglots like to do lots of reading and listening. And there is, amongst the polyglot community, it's interesting because there's big arguments about this. You know, there are people who like to do output so speak from day one and speak as much as possible. And there are people who like to just absorb and get lots of inputs at the beginning, which is similar to Krashen's ideas. And interestingly, you know, they both work. These people like to argue about which is the best way, but they both end up speaking languages very well. And I think the reason is that in the end, they do end up having a balance of input and output. So the ones who start with reading and listening, later on when they feel ready, do start to speak a lot as well. And the ones who start speaking do balance it as well. Even having a conversation, you know, you're still getting input from the native speakers, you're still listening. So I think that it is important to have a balance, and the way that you get this balance could be different. You might want to do it sooner rather than later, but I think you can choose because it seems to work as long as at some point you get a balance between input and output.